three presenters for today. I will now go ahead and turn it over to our three presenters for today. We have Ginger Walls, William Emfinger, and Carla Nooijen. Ginger, I think you're up first, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Clive. Well, what we're talking about in this session is a great carryover from this morning's plenary session. We'll be discussing using big data to improve quality and value for multiple stakeholders in CRT. My name is Ginger Walls. I'm a physical therapist and the Director of Clinical and Technical Education at Permobile. And all of our presenters today, Carla, William, Karin, and I are all employees of Permobile, so that is our disclosure. My colleagues will be introducing themselves as they come up to their section of the talk to speak. So for today, we'll be describing how data from connected chair technology can be used to improve wheelchair performance, to better understand wheelchair users' behavior, and to inform practice and service, as well as other value-added opportunities for other stakeholders in the CRT environment, including the wheelchair rider. We'll be sharing actual data from Power Assist and Power Wheelchair connected technology. We'll share with you a little bit about where the data came from and how it was collected, as well as to discuss user behavior and performance insights that we can gather from the data. So first, it's really important to take care of your data. Permobile has developed and follows strict data privacy principles to protect our users. It's important to understand that the wheelchair rider must first consent for data to be collected for both Permobile connected power wheelchairs and for manual wheelchair riders who use the push tracker E2 with their smart drive. All of the data is protected. We do not transfer data to third parties where we don't have control over how the data is being used. We will discuss, though, at the end of this, how we collaborate with other researchers and clinicians for research. So why adopt connected technology in CRT? Wheelchair riders can leverage technology to have a more informed and empowered mobility experience with real-time power wheelchair insights. Service providers can access valuable wheelchair data and analytics, improving remote diagnostic and service capabilities for the connected wheelchair. This can help reduce the need for costly service visits and strengthen the remote service experience in order to maximize the uptime for the power wheelchair rider. Connected technology can impact the future of manufacturing and design, as well as fuel research, by providing actual user behavior and product data for analysis, ultimately to demonstrate value to payers and to the healthcare system. Permobile products that have connected data capabilities are pictured here. They gathered the data that's going to be presented today. Smart Drive can be used on a variety of manufacturers' chairs, both rigid and folding frames. The data that William will share today is data from wheelchair riders using a push tracker E2 and Smart Drive MX2 Plus only. Permobile power wheelchairs that have Permobile Connect included are the M3, the M5, the F3, the F5, and the F5 Corpus VS. To take advantage of the My Permobile app for the wheelchair rider, fleet management for the service provider, Connect-ready wheelchairs must be activated. This is typically done when delivering the power wheelchair to the consumer. Once activated, the SIM card within the Connect Me unit on the chair automatically transmits important wheelchair data to the cloud. We're going to review several key elements of the My Permobile app that connects wheelchair users with information about their chair to help them get the most out of it. My Permobile Voice Assistant offers a hands-free way to engage with the Permobile app, or My Permobile app, and access to important wheelchair information. Permobile riders, especially those without upper extremity function, can use the voice assistant at home or on the go with any Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant device or a smartphone app. Other features on the My Permobile app include power wheelchair battery status information, an integrated map and distance traveled, power seating activity tracking, settings, which includes key systems information, and in-app tutorials. Fleet management is a web-based portal, so it can be accessed through an internet browser on any device that connects to the web. That includes laptop and desktop computers, tablets, and smartphones. Service providers can use any of these devices to have access to real-time wheelchair data and analytics from Permobil connected chairs. Before leaving our factory, Permobil Corpus Power wheelchairs are assigned to a service provider or branch or a VA facility based on who ordered the chair. Then once activated, that particular chair will automatically send data specifically to the fleet management account for that individual provider or VA location. There's 6 key features in fleet management: the dashboard, knowledge hub, wheelchair details, wheelchair metrics, error log, and order history. The fleet management portal and chair-specific information can only be accessed by the specific VA or service provider assigned to a particular chair. Currently, Permobil's fleet management system contains all Permobil connected wheelchairs, over 10,000 now. That's a lot of chairs. Key information is continuously monitored, and the system flags when issues or errors occur. The system supports more efficient service by enabling remote troubleshooting and reducing the number of visits needed to resolve issues. On the manual wheelchair with Power Assist, the Smart Drive Push Tracker app advances daily mobility for the manual wheelchair user. The Push Tracker app produces and delivers activity statistics designed to promote optimal mobility for the manual wheelchair user, tracking distances, pushes, and coast time. Battery usage is also tracked and shown on the smartwatch. Manual wheelchair users with a goal of increasing coast time and decreasing pushes over their current distance traveled or increasing their overall distance traveled can set daily goals and track their progress. The app also allows setting adjustment and wireless updates for all Smart Drive users, but again, the data we're discussing today is from users with a Smart Drive MX2 Plus with their Push Tracker E2 who chose to share their data. As we review the data gathered, we will explore different ways of analyzing the data: user behavior insights and performance insights. The user behavior insights provide insights into how the devices are actually being used by the wheelchair riders, while wheeled performance insights provide insights into how devices are functioning long-term. Both these types of insights add value to inform future product development, to inform future CRT recommendations in practice, as well as other real-time clinical practice recommendations, and to facilitate provider service, saving time and money and adding value to the wheelchair user's experience. Look for these yellow icons throughout the presentation as we've tried to connect the data that we're going to share with user behavior or performance insights. So with that, I will turn it over to William.
Thanks, Ginger. So as Ginger said, I'll be walking us through the analysis of the Push Tracker E2 data from our Smart Drive ecosystem today. Just a little bit of background. I'm the director of R&D, and I run a division within Permobil that is specifically charged with Power Assist devices. And as part of that, I've been with Smart Drive for a long time, ever since we came from pre-Smart Drive propulsion study all the way to the Power Assist devices we have today. Next slide, please. So the data set we're covering, as I mentioned, is the Push Tracker E2, and that is a subset of users that comes from total connected Smart Drives, around 15,000 users, of which about 11,000 have given us consent for research and product development. The Push Tracker E2 and the apps, and therefore the data that we're collecting, were launched towards the end of 2019. And so the data that we'll be looking at today covers the range from end of 2019 all the way up until today. Next slide, please. So some of the key metrics that we have across the few different apps in our ecosystem are things like push count and coast time, which come from our Push Tracker app. They are geared more towards the manual wheelchair activity monitoring and goal setting, as Ginger said. And that's an app that is on our wearables and can be connected with the Push Tracker mobile app on the phone, where you can create an account and link to the back end so that you can give us consent, and that's where we can get the data. That app is designed to be used in conjunction with or completely separate from the smart drive, up to the user's choice. The hope being that any manual wheelchair user who wishes to track their manual wheelchair propulsion can do so with the Push Tracker app. Now, if they have a smart drive and they choose to control it with the Push Tracker E2, we have a Smart Drive MX2 Plus app. And within there, alongside obviously being able to control and configure the smart drive, we do track some usage information, such as the odometer on the smart drive, how far it's gone, how far that smart drive has rolled, as well as how far it has directly driven the user. And that's what we call the motor odometer, and that provides us the drive distance. Similarly, we also collect and monitor how much battery the smart drive is using. And these different metrics are some of the metrics that we'll look at in this section of the presentation today. Again, as Ginger said, user privacy is paramount to us. So none of what we collect, and especially none of what we'll be presenting today, is related to diagnosis, and all of it is, of course, anonymized. Next slide, please. So to start diving in to the Push Tracker ecosystem, as Ginger mentioned, we have a mobile app, which is what allows these systems, both the smartwatch as well as the other products in our smart drive ecosystem, to connect to our backend and to provide data to us, as well as to provide more insight to the user. And just one of the key takeaways from the slide is I wanted to show that what we actually have in our backend, as far as like raw data as well as aggregate data, is directly visible by the end users within the app. We do obviously do some more analysis and presentation in the app to give weekly and monthly views, but when you look at any individual day, you are actually looking at the raw data that we collect, and that's what we'll be analyzing today. If we go to the next slide, we can start actually taking a dive into what this looks like. Part of creating an account within our Push Tracker app and within our Push Tracker ecosystem requires specifying how you want to control your smart drive. And that's this graph on the right here, is how we're actually seeing how our users are controlling the smart drive. And that is something that if you create an account, which again isn't required, but if you do, if you continue using it, you have to say whether you're using a Push Tracker E2, a Push Tracker, or a switch control. And this is interesting for us because this allows us to see how people prefer to use, or how they are choosing to use their smart drive. And you can see from this graph, vast majority of our users are using one of our two current wearable options, although some people do still use the manual push buttons. Now, again, just to reiterate, the subsequent activity and usage data that we'll be looking at today principally covers only covers the Push Tracker E2. Now, alongside this, as part of the user profile, they can provide some information completely optionally as to what kind of chair they have. That is it folding, pediatric, or rigid? And that gives us good insight into what kinds of users, what kinds of chairs our smart drive is functioning on. And that can give us some insight into where we might have a gap in compatibility or education in the market, or just in meeting the user's needs. Similarly, we can take a look at what kind of chair make, who the manufacturer of their chair is, and this gives us good attachment and compatibility information, as well as, again, just trying to look at what users aren't currently able necessarily to get a smart drive, or aren't getting a smart drive based on their chair. And that's something that we try to target and challenge by expanding the compatibility offering of our smart drive ecosystem. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we want to look at is moving to a wearable. Obviously has various different trade-offs, and then moving from the original wearable that we had, which was our Push Tracker, to the E2, which is a smartwatch. One of the key concerns we had, obviously, is battery life. When you add a brighter screen and more connectivity options, that has an impact on battery life. And so we wanted to see how are our users wearing their watch, both is it meeting their needs, but also just how much are they actually using their smartwatch. And so one of the things that we track is, as part of the activity, how much they're actually wearing it per day. Now, this isn't a perfect representation. I want to be clear with that, because we don't keep track of exactly how long they're wearing it. But what we do track is how many 30-minute intervals within a day they wear their watch, or their watch is active in recording data. And you can see from our users, there's a lot of variance in how much people wear their Push Tracker E2 in a given day. all the way from just once or 0 times a day for like 1 or 0 30-minute intervals a day, all the way up to many intervals equating to something like 16 hours a day. And there's a wide distribution over the days of users that we have. And this gives us good insight as we look at how the other metrics, things like push counts and stuff that we'll get to in a second, how representative that is of the population and of their usage characteristics. Next slide, please. So getting into that push tracker activity, one of the questions we had early on, way back when we started trying to say, let's count pushes even with the original push tracker, is how much are our users pushing per day? Again, I want to point out that right now this doesn't segregate smart drive uses versus non-smart drive uses, or pushes with smart drive, pushes without smart drive. This is all pushes. But what we have seen from our data is that the vast majority is of days that people are wearing their push tracker E2 is contains less than 100 pushes. But we want to see what that distribution looks like, see how many times people are pushing more than 500 pushes a day, more than 1,000 pushes a day, and see what that distribution of activity looks like. And this gives us a good idea of whether people are wearing the watch for activity tracking or whether people are wearing it more to control their smart drive, vice versa. And this just helps us kind of gauge how useful they may find it, as well as how active people are. Again, this is early analysis, but we want to present it here for you all. Next slide, please. One of the other key aspects we want to start looking at from the smart drive ecosystem is how far they're actually driving per day. So how much that motor is on the smart drive is actually powering their propulsion. And so somewhat unsurprising to us, we found that the vast majority of people drive less than 2 miles, and most people in our data set actually drive less than 1 mile per day, which tends to line up pretty well with the larger population, just mobility metrics, just generally around people. But this is also good because if we go to the next slide, we can also match this up with how much battery they're using to do so. So one of the other metrics I mentioned before that we capture is how much battery they use per day. And similarly, we see that they go, the majority of people, 95% of the days, at least that we have in our data set, consume less than 25% of the smart drive battery charge. Similarly, we had less than 25% going fewer than 2 miles. And that actually indicates to us that our smart drive battery is meeting the needs of our users. They're not needing to go 80 or 75, 80 or 100% of their smart drive battery. They have more than 1 day's worth of charge. And that allows us to then say, okay, how long is an acceptable recharge time? Are people okay charging per night or every few days? That's something we can evaluate and see, can we decrease that size? Because again, in the power assist space, weight is key, right? We want to decrease the weight of the smart drive as much as possible. And so if we can decrease the battery even further or provide other options, that's what we want to know that. And that this data is a start in helping us answer some of those questions. So that is the end of our smart drive session. I will turn it over to Carla. Thank you.
Thanks, William. My name is Carla Nooijen, and I have a PhD in rehabilitation sciences, and I currently work as a senior researcher. I will continue presenting the ProMobile Connect data, that is the data from our power wheelchairs. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the whole connected platform, and Ginger already talked more on the upper layer there, and I will focus on the down part of the slide. It is important to note that the data is collected by the wheelchairs and is then gathered in the Connect Me unit and then sent via the cellular network to the cloud, and the data are then being stored there if consent has been given in the app. Next, please. So this is an overview of the data that are collected. First of all, the events. We collect on-off data, error data, and the charging data. And with an odometer, we collect distance data. So on the on and off data and on the distance data, I will present some analysis later. Other data that we also collect are data from the actuators, so the frequency and duration of tilt, recline, leg rest, elevation and standing, and also battery data, including the state of health and the state of charge. So as part of the app, GPS can be used, which is important to note that is optional, and we never store this or analyze this for user privacy reasons. So again, to stress that it is anonymous and we do not have data on user characteristics such as diagnosis. And another thing to acknowledge is that we do not have a direct measurement to determine if the user is sitting in the wheelchair. So that is a limitation that is important to keep in mind when we're going to look at the data in a little bit. Next slide, please. So the data collection started at different time points in different parts of the world. So we started collecting data in the end of 2017 in the US. Canada joined in the summer of 2018. Europe joined at different time points in 2019 and 20, dependent on the country. And then in Australia joined at the beginning of 2019. Next, please. So this is then an overview of the wheelchairs that we have in the data. As Ginger also said, we have more than 10,000 connected chairs. And in this sample, we have more than 7,000 chairs that have consented and are not demo chairs. Those are also obviously excluded as they are not the interest of what we will be looking at here. And then today we will analyze a subsample of those chairs that have at least 6 months of data. So those are 5,011. This is then also to exclude those chairs that also only have been recently started to collect data, and we are especially interested in looking at long-term patterns. We're going to compare the different regions where we have US, Canada, Europe, and Australia, with most of the chairs in the US, more than 4,000, and the different wheelchair models. We have M3, M5, F3, F5, and F5ES, and most chairs are M3, more than 2,000, and around 1,500 are F3 chairs. Next, please. So I'm going to present two examples based on the on-off data and on the distance data, and I will start with the on-off data now. So this is to start with the behavior insight, as Ginger mentioned also at the beginning, that we will point this out on the slides. And here we're going to answer the question, how many days of the week are active days? And for the active day, we use the definition of 1 power on and off cycle plus 5 minutes of on time. So this is a pretty conservative definition. If we look at the graph, we see the 7 days of the week and the number of chairs. And we see that the red line is the mean there, 5.1, and the green line is the median, 6.5. We see that our data is skewed. Most are on the right side of this graph. So it makes then more sense to look at the median there. So we can say that chairs are active for 6.5 days per week. And almost 60% of the chairs is active 7 days per week. That is then that long bar on the right side. And among the other chairs, there is a large spread. So if we look at the 1 to 6 days a week, there is a large spread there. So this gives us then an indication for how many days per week the chairs are being used. Next slide, please. So here we're going to look actually at the same data, but we're looking at it in a little bit of a different way. So instead of summarizing it per week, here we're looking at it when it's over the total of 6 months. So in 6 months, for those of you calculating fast, we have 183 days. And those are then displayed as possible available days here in this graph. We have a mean of 134, but again here, as the data are skewed, it makes more sense to look at the median. So we have a median of 170 active days out of the 183 available days. And we can also see that 28% of the chairs are active on all days. That is that high bar on the right side. And amongst the others, like we've seen on the previous slide, there is a large spread also over the 6 months period. So this then gives us an indication on how many days in the 6 months the chairs are being used. Next, please. So now we're going to look at if in these data there are differences between regions and models. So starting with regions, that is the left graph, where we have Australia, US, Europe, and Canada. And we see that Australia, US, and Canada are all about this 6.5 median that we have presented before, but Europe is slightly below that. If we look at the other graph comparing the models, we see that they're all more or less at that 6.5 median, so not too much difference there. So here is again a behavior insight indicating that EU users use their chair on less days per week compared to the other regions, and it also indicates that there's no difference amongst users in different chair models. Next, please. So the next thing we're going to look at is the first time that wheelchair is turned on per day and the last time that the wheelchair is turned off per day. So we're going to start looking at the left graph first. So that left circle that is displaying the first time that the wheelchair is turned on per day. So maybe a little bit more of an unusual graph, but no worries, I will talk us through it. So we have here 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 12 o'clock. And we see that most data, so we see there that blue area is mostly around there's between 7 and 10 o'clock in the morning. And the more blue, that indicates that more chairs have been turned on at that time. So if we calculate a median from this, we see that the median time turned on is 9 a.m. in the morning. So if we're then going to look at the other graph that shows us the last time that the wheelchair is turned off per day, we see that most data is between 9 and 11 o'clock, and the median here is 10 to 10 at night. So this is then an indicator of during what time periods users are using their wheelchair. We can go to the next. Now we're going to look at a performance insight. So this is again the on-off data, but now we look at the average duration that the wheelchair is turned on. We know that users turn on and off their wheelchair multiple times per day. Some do it a few times, others do it many times. But here we add up all the time that the wheelchair actually has been turned on. And we see that the wheelchair is turned on for an average of 6 hours per day. And in the graph, we see the different days of the weeks and the average hour that they have been on. And then we see that it's all around these 6 hours and slightly less in the weekend, but not so much. Pretty stable there. So together with the distance data, this is an important information when we talk, for example, about battery capacity. Next, please. Here we are then comparing this time turned on between the different regions and between the different models. So first on the left side, we see the different regions. So we had the mean of 6 hours per day, and we see that US and Canada are just above that mean, whereas Europe and Australia have a mean of 5 hours per day. So this is then lower than the other regions. In the graph, in the table right below that, we see the different chair models, and we see that the highest duration turned on per day was for F5 with just over 7 hours, and the runner-up there is M5 with 6.6 hours. So we can conclude this is then a performance insight, and we see that the time turned on is different per region and also different per model. So that this indicates that there might be different demands for regions and wheelchair models. Next, please. So now we have worked our way through the on and off data examples. So let's continue with the distance ones. So we start with this rainbow graph, which shows us the median daily distance per month of the year. So this is actually 2021. And we see that the month that has the lowest bar is January with 0.66 kilometers per day. And the highest one is September with almost 1 kilometer per day. So if we look at this from a behavior insight perspective, we can say that the user's traveling distance is influenced by the season, and more from a performance perspective, that some seasons are more demanding than others, which needs to be considered, for example, in the need for service. We can also make a comparison to the literature here. I picked two studies, one of Sonnenblum et al. In 2008, looking in 21 users for 2 weeks, how far they had traveled, and they found the median per day of 1.1 kilometers per day. So pretty close to the median that we found for September. Cooper et al. Looked in different users, and amongst the community users, they found the mean per day of 1.7 kilometers. This is a little bit more difficult to compare the mean to the median that we have presented here. When we have looked at the mean, we also see a higher value since the data are skewed. So a little bit more difficult there, but still interesting to see how this is compared. Okay, next one, please. So here we have the same data. We are looking at all chairs over the whole of 2021. So we have the different months from January to January over this whole graph and the distance that they have traveled. And then the red lines that you see are Sundays. And what you see is that there's often like a dip on those red lines. So this indicates that users actually travel less on Sundays, meaning that they might rest, or we can say that some days of the week are more performance demanding than others. Next, please. So this looks then very similar, but now actually we've only picked out the chairs from the US, as we're gonna make a comparison between the different regions here. So these are then the US chairs, and if we go to the next slide, we add the Canadian chairs here. So blue is the US and orange are the Canadian chairs. And you see in the first few months of this graph, the winter months, the distances are very similar, but then over the summer, the Canadian chairs travel more. If we go to the next one, we're gonna add Europe there in green. And we see that Europe over the whole year is higher than US and Canada. So EU chairs have longer distance over the whole year. And an interesting note here is that I previously presented then the duration that the wheelchairs had been on. And there we've seen actually that EU was lower compared to US and Canada, where EU had this 5 hours on time compared to 6 hours in US and Canada, whereas users do travel more. So that's absolutely something to dig into further. Next one, please. Now, in the next slide here, we have added also Australia in red. So we have many lines here, but if we look closely, we see that Australia in red there has the inverse seasonal shape. So they have the inverse direction, which makes sense, right? Because they are on the other side of the world. So we can conclude here that the distance users travel is different dependent on the region that they live in, and regions should be taken into account when discussing, for example, the frequency of service. Next, please. So here we're going to compare now the different wheelchair models and their distance. So we start with the F3 corpus and the M3 corpus that have very similar patterns over the year. If we go to the next one, we add here in green the F5 corpus VS, and then we see that it's slightly higher. If we go to the next one, we're adding in the red and the purple line, where the red line is F5 and M5 is the purple line, and we see that these are higher over the whole year compared to the other models. So we can conclude that the distance users travel is different dependent on the wheelchair model, and wheelchair models traveling the most might have different needs in terms of, for example, the battery capacity requirements. From a different perspective here, looking not at the averages, but at the extreme values. So here we looked, what is the all-time distance of the most traveled wheelchairs? We picked the most 15 chairs that have traveled the most over from all the data over the whole time period available. And these are then displayed in this graph here. And you see that within these 15 chairs, there is even one chair that their wheelchair the purple bar on the right, that even compared to the other most traveled chairs, this chair travels a lot. So it actually equals a distance that in 5 years would equal a travel around the world. So it is 12,000 kilometers in 1.5 years. And when we looked at the daily averages, because of course we were a little bit curious there, we found that those were 20 to 30 kilometers per day. So in addition to average distance, insights into this extreme distance values gives guidelines for maintenance and the frequency of it. Alrighty, back to you, Ginger.
Okay, great job, William and Carla. Thank you for going through that data. So now we're going to transition to the discussion of connecting the data to quality and value in CRT practice. First, let's discuss how connected chair data can help us improve clinical practice and service. We'll look at a couple examples of how data from the fleet management portal and the My Permobile app can be utilized to inform clinical practice and service. Whether you're part of a small clinical practice or larger small provider or larger small VA, data from connected technology can help in a number of different ways. So for clinicians, data can inform post-delivery follow-up with clients with access to their charging habits and their power seat function utilization. The clinician can identify education opportunities from the system and keep position coaching for app users. The clinician can also gain clarity on the client's average driving range to inform future chair recommendations and to facilitate follow-up time by providing education to resolve simple service issues remotely. If a clinician is involved in dispatching service, especially like in the VA model, they have opportunities to improve effectiveness and efficiency of service as well. For service providers, since the portal provides real-time metrics on battery health, charging, utilization, error codes, and error code resolution, there's a real opportunity to improve the remote diagnostic and service process, reduce the time or days that an error code stays on, eliminate unnecessary parts orders or visits by allowing the team to see the part order history on the chair. The portal is also ideal for technicians who are still learning or for service providers who perform infrequent repairs, and the Knowledge Hub provides technical resources and a system log with suggested remedy actions when a problem does appear. The portal can help providers in rural areas to reduce unnecessary visits and travel time, and is also ideal for large providers that serve many clients, maybe in a metropolitan area, to improve efficiency and serve more people timely. So an example of how battery data in the connected wheelchair service portal can save time and money and address client needs is shown in this scenario. Here, the client reports that my wheelchair is not holding a charge. So looking up the serial number in fleet management, the provider can view the battery state of health and details, and checking the battery charging and voltage metrics allows a technician to gain insight into how the wheelchair batteries are being charged and maintained. This insight is really helpful when determining the next best step to address the client's concern. Here we see the battery charge percentages and current and voltage graphs displayed in the portal. If a user is reporting that their batteries are not holding a charge or that they're not getting enough driving range, then examining the charge percentage over time can help gauge how often the client is charging their batteries and whether or not those charging cycles are long enough to reach a 100% charge status. If there are several days where the max charge does not read 100%, we'll be able to see this in fleet management and can suggest to the client that they're not charging their chair long enough to fully charge their batteries. Current and voltage data can also be used to better understand the battery condition, and we know that the power wheelchair requires at least 24 volts to function properly. And while it's okay to have isolated voltage drops under 24 volts, when a chair is under a high load, we'll see that voltage drop sometimes. But if it's frequent voltage drops below 24 volts, then it can suggest an issue with the batteries. So looking at this data based on the information here with no low voltage incidences and a history of not charging to 100% every day, then that user can be advised to increase their charging to daily, and an unnecessary service visit and battery placement may be avoided. With a manual wheelchair user utilizing a smart drive with the push tracker app and a smartwatch, the clinician has access to valuable data. Understanding the distance actually traveled by the client can help inform recommendations for future manual wheelchairs and parts or accessories. So understanding the number of pushes and coast time per day can also aid in better insight into the client's risk for repetitive stress injury, and can aid in teaching self-monitoring of the number of pushes, coast time, and distance traveled over fatigue or perceived exertion or pain, as well as providing justification for new equipment. For the service provider, gaining insight into distance traveled and battery utilization is helpful in predicting service of the battery, tires, casters, and other required maintenance. So let's zoom in and consider the value of this data for individual chair users. Connectivity is integrated into almost all of the aspects of our world, and often it helps things to run smoothly. It should be no different for the wheelchair rider using connected CRT. The power wheelchair is the very foundation of function for many individuals, and what a great opportunity to leverage connected technology to create a more empowered mobility experience. Power assist data translates into maximizing participation, which is distance traveled in this case. So while minimizing push strokes and maximizing coast time for optimal health and function for the manual wheelchair rider. Connected power wheelchair data translates into maximizing wheelchair uptime, which also translates into health, function, and participation for the end user. So let's meet Brenda. Brenda is a woman who's been a full-time power wheelchair rider for the past 26 years due to MS. Brenda's MS has caused respiratory dysfunction, and she's been vent dependent for the past 22 years. Brenda received her Permobil M5 in 2018 and has been using the My Permobil app and fleet management benefits ever since. She's an early adopter. Brenda lives a 45-minute drive away from her wheelchair provider, so she appreciates having the remote diagnostics available from the service provider through the fleet management portal. Brenda's an animal lover and a service dog owner, and part of her responsibility with the service dog is to keep him well exercised. So Brenda uses the My Permobil app to measure how far she walks the dog to ensure he's getting enough consistent exercise. Brenda's pretty much memorized how far she travels in a day just around the house. So anything above that mileage is how far she's taken Clint, the service dog, for a walk. Brenda's MS causes deficits in proprioception and kinesthesia, so she finds the seating element very helpful in showing how each power seat function actuator is actually being used, so she knows where her body is in space. So confidence influences your ability to make decisions and set and attain higher goals and overcome challenges. Brenda became an early adopter of connected technology after her old wheelchair's battery died on a visit to Disneyland, and her husband had to push her and her power wheelchair all the way back out of the park, back to her van. So Brenda did not venture out much after that experience until she could be sure that her chair and her battery were going to carry her through her daily activities safely. Having this information from her My Permobile app increased Brenda's confidence to venture back out again, and is a great example of Sakakibara's concept of wheelchair confidence, having a direct impact on Brenda's life space mobility. It's interesting to note, after Carla's review of the data, that Brenda has an M5 as well, right? Traveling further. So it's all connected there. So let's zoom out now to take a look at connected data from a bigger picture perspective, considering research and value-added opportunities beyond day-to-day practice. Connected data offers opportunities to fuel research, for sure. Collaborative projects allow us to work together with clinicians and researchers to overlay data with user information. So if you're a researcher and you want to design a study with informed consent that data would be extracted from the Permobile cloud for research, that's a strong way of developing an understanding of how the data would be used in the study. We do share data under the conditions that the study has IRB approval, that users sign a informed consent, and there is a signed research agreement. In addition, collaborators don't share information with Permobile about the users, but data is selected from the cloud using the serial numbers of the chairs. So please reach out to us at research@permobile.com if you're interested in collaborating on a research project. We can utilize data performance insights to inform manufacturing too. For example, in 2019, Permobile analyzed recline actuator error incidences in the new M3 versus the F3, which had been previously launched. And the new M3's actuator was experiencing fewer error incidences. So Permobile switched the F3 recline actuator to start using the same one as on the M3. Understanding average distances riders travel in a day, as well as the outliers, can inform both manufacturing and service models. Understanding behavior insights can help clinicians and providers truly match and justify CRT chair recommendations with the client's actual needs. Payers could see the value added by providing the right chair for the right person based off real data with outcomes based off chair uptime, which ultimately benefits the consumer. So if we zoom out again to that big picture level, we can see that big data from connected chair technology can have an impact on multiple stakeholders involved in product acceptance, decision-making, the user, the caregiver, the provider, the researcher, the payer, the clinician, society, sustainability of our healthcare system as a whole, where CRT fits into that and how it's viewed, especially when we're considering a more value-based or outcomes-based model. So with that, that brings us to the end and time for questions, if there are any that have not yet been answered in the chat.
Thank you, Ginger, Carla, and William. We will take questions from the attendees. You're welcome to post your questions in the chat window, or you can turn on your microphone and also directly address them to our presenters.
I saw that Michelle had written in the chat that these are impressive numbers considering a global pandemic. And maybe it's just good to clarify also that once people have consented, then data are continuously being collected. So not so much affected by the pandemic in that way. Also important to know is that people can choose to withdraw their consent there. But having said that, it gives us also important information about the impact of the pandemic. Now we've looked at 2021 data when I presented the distance, but we also have the 2019 data before the pandemic. So we're definitely going to compare that and see what the impact has been there. So that will be interesting and something that we can follow up on.
Great comment, Carla. Interesting.
There's a question from Kyle in the chat.
Kyle says, so much data and you all presented it very well. Thanks, Kyle. The visuals, you were amazing, your special team. There's so many opportunities to utilize the data. How do you prioritize your initiative? So I'll leave that to my data scientist friends to start with.
Should I go for it, William?
Sure.
That is a very good question and a difficult question as well. We have many questions that we can answer, but as we also heard this morning, when we have big data, it is not as easy to make from all these information actually knowledge. So what I can say here is that we basically are only at the beginning of this adventure, and we've started with some more of the core questions, and we're just building and building from there. And if there are any special interest from people, we're very happy to hear, and feel free to contact us if you have any ideas in what should be next for us from more of this research perspective. And then when it comes to, for example, wheelchair development, we get questions internally asking, now we're working on this, can you look at, for example, the angles in which certain actuators have been used, so we can use this as direct information into how we should use that in the wheelchair that is being developed at the moment. Do you have anything to add, William?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely agree with what Carla said, and coming from a product development perspective, which is more my area, I think our biggest priority and the highest priority we put anytime we're looking at the data and the problems we try to solve is really like trying to figure out, okay, are there unmet needs that this data can point us to, or any product failures, reliability issues, any opportunities for improving the quality of life for our users. From a product development perspective, that is the most important thing we do, and that's what my team and I, and just our R&D team in general throughout Permobile, and including with the regional clinical experts and product experts, we try to make sure that we focus on anything that we can do that improves our products and the way that it can improve how it affects their use by our users and therefore their quality of life.
I see there's a question about what is the most surprising thing that you have seen?
You want to go first, Carla? You've definitely seen more data than I have.
I need to think about this. Or do you have something on the top of your head, William?
Off the top of my head, I would say I'm not gonna say I didn't expect it, but it was still surprising to see. I didn't get a chance to dive into it in the presentation, but it's in the slides. If you look at the data, there are people that have actually charged their smart drive and then continue to reuse it during the day. And that lines up very well with, going more than 10 miles in a day, which is, it's interesting to see, because that means that they actually have to take it off their chair and recharge it. And that was, a little bit surprising. So and we use that from a product development perspective to help balance out how good is the battery?
Exactly. That is a good one. Now that I've had some time to think, I was thinking about what I was also mentioning in the presentation, that sometimes you think that things will add up. For example, when we look at the time that the wheelchair is turned on, that will be related. We haven't looked at that direct relationship, but when we saw that was lower in the EU while they travel more, that was surprising to me, and that really makes you want to dig into it further and further.
Yeah, when Carla and I were discussing the data and we saw that Americans especially traveled less on Sundays, I told her it was because we were all watching football, and that wasn't very surprising at all. So another question about pediatric big data analysis, and is that space going to be developing differently due to different layers of complexity in terms of children, caregivers, lower user numbers? Any thoughts about that?
It is then tricky here, since we don't have the information on the user, so we actually don't know if they are of the ages that they are in the here in these chairs that we presented. We don't know if they would be pediatric, so we really can't answer that unless we look at it together in collaborative projects.
So
That's
while
right.
we wait, we might have time for one more question. And while we wait for that question, I'm happy to share the CEU code for our session today. It is RU8AUX. It's also in your chat window. It's RU8AUX. That's Romeo Uniform 8 Alpha Uniform X-ray. Yeah, a couple more minutes. I would also like to thank our three presenters, Ginger, Carla, and William. Thank you for a very engaging session and presentation. Lots of data for us to, and findings for us to think about. If we don't have any more questions, then we can end the session a few minutes early. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
you coming.
Carla, for moderating.